So welcome back to Ambleford, and we're back on the school bus today. And my name's James. This is
Emily.
Slick. And today we're going to be talking about what we're going to talk about.
Today we are going to talk about ADHD, which is a bit of a hot topic for lots and lots and lots of different reasons. But our title for today is ADHD or Just the Wrong Classroom, Rethinking How We Define Attention in School.
Okay.
So we're trying to kind of think, I suppose, quite specifically today about how ADHD affects children in school and in education more broadly. And whether for some children actually the environment is as much of a trigger for them and the way that they kind of react as the diagnosis itself.
Yeah, I think, well, this is obviously a little bit more your area of expertise than I, but from my experience, you know, it's interesting that, you know, I maybe we both see this. We see ADHD obviously in a classroom setting seems to present itself as what we'd call bad behaviour, poor behaviour.
Yeah.
No?
No, I would never try and attribute positive or negative connotations, I think, particularly where there is a diagnosis of ADHD with or without kind of other diagnoses alongside. I think it's something to be careful of, to kind of say that it's just kind of poor behaviour or bad behaviour, because I think actually it's not necessarily.
I suppose what I'm trying to say is more that the behaviour of those children within a classroom setting. What am I trying to say here?
Well, I think I know what you're trying to say, but I'm not sure. I think.
So in a classroom setting, there's some unhelpful behavioural traits that present themselves, particularly actually in young boys. That seems to be where it shows themselves as kind of, you know, being disruptive, being maybe aggressive, outbursty, impulsive.
I don't think that's a boy thing. I think that's just a child
Well,
thing.
I think it shows itself in boys more than it does in girls. I think girls tend to be able to mask those things
I think
better.
they try harder to mask those things.
Yeah. And so, you know, I will see behaviours in my forest school practice where I kind of go, okay, I can see that if this child was confined, if they were in a box for any period of time, I could see how they would be bouncing off the walls. I can see how they would be disrupting other children that are able to regulate themselves far better. In our environment, it doesn't matter really, because they've got the space. There's no walls to bounce off. They can go and run off that energy. They can go and display that energy in whatever way that feels good for them or soothes them or helps them regulate. But within a classroom environment, I can see how they would struggle with that. And actually, it's interesting because I will often. So parents at drop off will, and I'll clock it straight away. The parents will go something like, "And make sure you're good at drop off," and at pick up, they'll say, "Oh, so how's he been today?" And they'll say it with that big sigh, and I'll kind of go, "Perfectly fine, absolutely wonderful," you know, because he's not been, and I say he because it just is generally a boy, they are generally absolutely fine. Very rarely do I see ADHD on one of the forms that we send out and get back from parents. And that child has struggled. Within that framework, ADHD tends not to be one of the kind of problem diagnoses. And from your perspective, from a school perspective, what's your...
So I think the way that we offer school at Ambleford is very, very, very different to the kind of traditional school environment that I have taught in for the last 20 years. The ability to be flexible actually is probably one of our greatest strengths, because it allows us to work with the child that comes to us on that day, and make sure that things are kind of working around their needs at that specific moment.
Because you say on that day, because their energies will be different from day to day.
Yeah, absolutely. As any human being's energy does. That's not a child or an adult thing. It's a human thing. And actually, if you wake up and you are in exactly the same state and frame of mind and capacity every day, then I think there is a broader question as to why that might be the case, because that's not human. You know, we have the capacity for change. We are not robotic. We are not automatic. And so being able to work with a child as they present to you on that day allows you to meet them halfway. And actually, for a lot of children, when they arrive here, that's a real shock, because what they're used to is being told, well, if you won't sit down, then I'm going to put your name onto the sad face, or if you won't sit down, then you'll have to go and stand outside the door, or if you can't wait to tell me your answer, if you can't put your hand up, then you'll have to go and see the deputy head.
So our approach is more about working with the energy rather than trying to meet it head on.
It's not trying to control children. And I think our offering works particularly well. And actually, it doesn't work particularly well for children with ADHD. It just works particularly well for children. Because what it does is it allows each child to come in a very calm, safe state, knowing that they will be received however they come to us. Actually, when children arrive, they come to us in a very heightened emotional state, then there is no point in me trying to sit them down and get them through an English lesson, because in that heightened emotional state, nothing is going to go in. It is a waste of everybody's time.
Yeah.
So actually, our ability, because of our ratios, to work with that child, to just give them the space to be, and to work on regulation, actually means that becomes the presiding point.
Do you think that a diagnosis of ADHD, because it's that, calling it a diagnosis kind of instantly says there's something wrong with your child, and that I always have a problem with that, particularly when it comes to ADHD, because it always feels to me like I want to say, look, there's nothing wrong with your child. They're just not in the environment that supports their energy and their needs. My question was going to be, what's your thoughts of ADHD as a kind of a clinical diagnosis? I mean, has it got its place? Are there parameters to that?
For me personally, and I think as a mum of 2 boys with ADHD, as you know, as somebody who has seen numerous children come through my classes with that diagnosis. I think that as a diagnosis, it can be incredibly validating for the child involved, for the parents, for the support network around that child, because actually what it allows you to do is to say, this isn't a child who is, throwing their food all over the floor because they fancy it. They are struggling with something that is not within their control. It removes that label of, this is a child who is badly behaved.
But I mean, can it be something? Because we're calling it something medical by
It is
the term
it is a medical diagnosis in
well,
the same way that.
But is it not just a human trait? Because I struggle. I would challenge anybody listening or watching this to sit on a hard plastic chair for 6 hours a day, even 5 hours a day, to watch a presentation. Those that have worked in corporate jobs, we've all been there. An hour into somebody providing a presentation, your brain's gone. It strikes me as it's just a human trait to not be able to handle that.
No, I have to say, I think when it comes to ADHD, it is a chemical difference. That is my understanding from my own research, and I am very happy to be proven.
I get what the man tells you.
No, but this isn't what the man. I think the thing is that like all kind of neurodiverse diagnoses, for want of a better word, actually it's not about physiologically you are kind of better or worse or whatever else. Actually, it is just different. So, but you could say the same about being diabetic. You could say that is a chemical imbalance within the physiological system.
I maybe even have I'm not going to suggest that ADHD doesn't exist. I'm not going to go that far. I think that ADHD has always existed. I think it is maybe a measure of people's tolerance to kind of stimulation, boredom. I don't know. Do I have a problem with it being diagnosed? No, and I think you're right in what you're saying in that it kind of validates to some extent. I suppose what I'm trying to say is in my practice, which is very kind of low stress, no pressure, child-led, and from a forest school perspective, actually a child having ADHD on its own is never an issue. Mm-hmm. I can maybe see from your perspective, from a kind of a more academic perspective, in the delivery of our kind of curriculum-based stuff, I can see how you might meet more resistance than I do with that.
Yeah, and that isn't to say that there aren't lots of ways around that resistance.
Yes.
But I think ultimately for most children, in fact, for all children, whether you are neurodiverse or not, if you ask a child to do something that they don't want to do, inevitably the answer is going to be no. There are very few children who will turn around and go, oh yes, of course, that's exactly the thing that I didn't want to do.
Or a very lacklustre attempt at it.
Well,
at best.
Possibly, yes.
I mean, I think that's right.
So I think, it's easy to kind of say, we're in this, it's been reported in the news quite a lot recently that we're in this kind of tidal wave of diagnosis of neurodiversity in many different forms, whether that's ADHD or autism or whatever else. And I think it's really important to kind of say, for me, from my perspective, from my practice, I think actually what we're doing is we are realising that children don't all come from one mould. And as the mould, particularly in education, kind of tightens, more and more and more so, the stress that more and more children are put under, who perhaps, when you and I were at school, when the national curriculum was just about introduced, that kind of dates us a little. But actually, you know, it's easy to look back and say, well, you know, you might have had that one child that was labelled the kind of naughty kid in your class, but actually most people ticked along fairly all right. And that's mainly because actually the teacher had far more autonomy to be able to kind of go, okay, they really are not getting on with this. What else can we do today? And that simply isn't the case anymore, because there is so much pressure on teachers to create these kind of perfect minifigs. That's the only way I can represent it, is that I think actually we are expecting our children to kind of go into school as this lovely kind of squishy gloop of kind of plastic, mouldable plastic, that has had lots of playtime and free time and unstructured everything, and they're this wonderful kind of mouldable creative glob.
And school's job
And
is
school's
to
job
stamp
is
out
to stamp out a minifigure that looks the same as all the other minifigures, and behaves the same as all the other minifigures, and can do English and maths at the same level as all the other minifigures. And if there's one that kind of doesn't quite form right, then that's the teacher's fault, or it's the parent's fault for not engaging with the teacher, or it's the head's fault for not supporting the teacher to support the parent, to support the child. It becomes this cycle of blame.
It can almost never be the teacher's fault, because they're operating in such a tight band. They have very little influence,
Very
really.
much so, very much so.
You know, you can still get inspirational teachers. I remember going back, just, you know, in my school days, and certain teachers that would turn me on to a subject that I wouldn't ordinarily have any interest for. You know, it's like you know, like English literature. I got into reading because one particular teacher, and actually got a English literature GCSE, half decent English literature GCSE out of it, which, quite frankly, you know, I was never academic. And I think it was a surprise to anybody. But you know, you can still get an inspirational teacher who can try, even with the driest material, to kind of jazz it up. And congratulations to those teachers, because their miracle workers. They're creating something literally out of nothing. They're magicians, but they're a rare beast. You know,
There are hundreds of thousands of amazing teachers just in the UK education sector. But I think a lot of those teachers would argue that actually, if they could be given the autonomy to run their classes so that children with ADHD, children who have specific learning difficulties, who perhaps are going to find that very, very narrow structured environment very difficult to learn in, actually might find that far more tolerable, and therefore the behaviour needs are lessened, because actually the children are more able to stay within the environment that they find themselves in.
I mean, we always say, and quite specifically, that we are not a special needs school or facility or whatever.
Environment.
So nothing that we do is geared specifically towards children with special needs at all. And in fact, quite the opposite. We try to put people off. You know, we know our limitations as far as that's concerned. But I think one of the things that one of those areas where we are able to support is where it does come to ADHD, because it kind of makes little difference, really. You know, those children that can access what we provide from a schooling without a diagnosis, from a schooling perspective without a diagnosis, I don't think it makes a lot of difference to those with a diagnosis.
No, not at all. And there are, for some children, the diagnosis leads to the availability of medication, and that's a whole nother sphere of, it has its absolute critics and it has its absolute believers. And I think that really is one of those kind of cases of, you have to do, as a parent and in discussion with the child, if it's age appropriate, what is best for them. And I think that would always be my message, I think, to anybody who's just had that sort of diagnosis come through, is medication is not the kind of, the magic pill. Equally, it's not going to turn them into kind of some sort of zombie monster. From personal experience, we've found that it can be a really great way to engage a child's kind of nervous system back into what it needs to do, but equally it's not right for everybody.
Is our take-home message from this, is it that essentially, if your child has a diagnosis of ADHD, that absolutely does not mean that there's something wrong with them. Actually, it means that the environment that they're asked to operate in and the parameters with which they're asked to operate in is not right for them.
I think if their diagnosis has come through from school and that their diagnosis is kind of attached to their ability to function and to be their best selves as part of their education, then I think looking at the setting in more detail is probably a really good step to take. But I think it's really important to sort of say that ADHD, as far as I'm concerned, absolutely exists. It is a real thing and it is a real struggle for millions of people. And there is lots of fantastic support out there. And go and sort of find them. There's a brilliant lady called Jessica McCabe who runs a YouTube channel called How to ADHD, and she gives brilliant tips and tricks and things. She's just done things around the kind of holidays, and there are lots of amazing YouTubers and podcast creators, content creators who are kind of out there saying, try this, see if it works. If it does, great. You've just made your life a little bit easier over a time of the year when things tend to be a bit more all over the place. So don't be frightened of the diagnosis. Don't be frightened to get a diagnosis. But equally, don't let it define you and your child. It's not the be all and end all.
It's absolutely not a limiting
Absolutely
fact. I think
not.
It's almost, to some extent, it's a superpower for some of these kids. Their
Yeah.
ability to just go and go and go.
Yeah. And to think
remarkable.
laterally, and
Absolutely.
it's never a hindrance.
The right environment will harness that power,
Yeah,
and use
absolutely.
it absolutely as a force for positivity. In terms of, maybe you want. I know we need to wrap up, but in terms of the kind of practical things that you do at school, and I'll kind of try and lead you in a direction because I've obviously seen this, but if a child needs to regulate an emotion, what's your tactics for dealing with a child that actually that behaviour would be disruptive within a box format? How do you deal with that?
It always comes back to, first and foremost, just being very present with that child, looking at them physically, emotionally. Actually, is it really obvious that they're hungry?
Is it catching that rise
It's absolutely
of
catching
emotional
that rise,
state?
and
Yeah.
just being able to just to kind of catch those things. So many times you kind of go, oh yeah, of course we've let something go on too long, and they're hungry.
Oh, it does happen.
And just not being able to verbalise, because they haven't really recognised it in themselves, that they're hot or they're cold or they're hungry or they're tired or they've just had enough, can all mean that there is a sudden kind of flick into becoming dysregulated.
So, okay, so you've got a child, they've reached that state.
Yeah.
You're, I don't know, doing something boring like maths.
That's wonderful. Shush.
What do you do?
You say as little as possible. I mean, if you can manage with kind of 2 or 3 words,
So
that is the best.
Don't pick them out of the crowd and say, look, you're being a
No.
pain in the butt.
It's very much a case of if you can see that they need to leave, that needs to be facilitated. And as part of any good kind of plan, you would have somewhere that they know they can go to.
I mean, luckily, we're generally by the play park.
Yes.
So it's go and swing it out. Go and sit on the swing. Go and bounce on something.
Yeah.
And then come back to the group.
And again, it comes back to knowing your children kind of in detail, in knowing actually that is a child that needs to move when
Hence
they dysregulate.
why they struggle in a classroom of 30,
because actually they can't
close
leave.
to 40 kids.
They're not allowed to leave. They're not allowed to move out of their seat. At best they can go to the back of the classroom, but actually if there's somebody who's clicking their pen really loudly, that doesn't actually remove the thing that is triggering.
But there's nobody there to kind of say, look, Jimmy, I can see that you're getting overwhelmed by this. Go and do this. And plus, in a classroom, there's nowhere for them to go.
Yeah.
Other than kind of poking Billy next to them and
or going to the corner or going outside the room, and these things then become a kind of a shameful
and this is
thing.
what turns them off learning, isn't it?
Exactly, because then actually what they are not in control of physiologically, chemically, becomes something that has caused them embarrassment and upset and so on. And so it's then, and I think this is probably where a lot of teachers struggle, it's then the restorative. It's actually once you're back into, we're kind of on an even keel again and we're all okay, and we managed to get some lunch into Jimmy and give him the chance to kind of go out to playtime a little bit early so he could just have a bit of a quieter run round to run all that off. A lot of the time there's no time to then come back to that and kind of go, I actually, as your teacher, should have seen that, Susan clicking her pen was going to annoy you, and it's not Susan's fault because she's allowed to click her pen, but I could have helped you. So what can we do now to make sure that if there's somebody doing a repetitive noise that really you find really distracting or uncomfortable, that we don't have to get to where we got to today. And that restorative practice actually is the bit that is the most, it's the most important, because that's what ties the child back into the classroom and kind of goes, I'm safe here, I'm listened to here, I'm seen here.
But also from a position of self-reflection for that child, a position of learning for that child, is important, because this is something we were discussing yesterday, because we had a child, first time with us, very young, in our holiday club, who just got to a state of dysregulation beyond where she was able to cope. And so as a response to that, we obviously had a debrief about things that we could have done better in that moment. But part of what these children need to be able to do is start to recognise these feelings in themselves. It's a kind of overwhelming, kind of, I need to do something about this. And for them to be able to kind of go, okay, I'm feeling this. I need to remove myself away from this, but in a safe way. Now, the child that came to us yesterday, it was, like I say, it was her first time with us. There were other things going on there beyond ADHD as well, but she was not in a position to recognise those feelings, the ladder up that she was experiencing. I could see it. After lunchtime, I could kind of see a gradual, her ability to mask had been slipping. And really, in self-reflection, I probably should have gone, okay, well, let's kind of say we've maybe had enough of our day today, because ultimately, she got herself into quite a bit of a state where she just wanted to get away from the group, and that's normally fine. But where am I going with this?
Well, I think we're talking, I think, from this, that a lot of children are taught about zones of regulation.
That's it, yeah.
So a lot of children, particularly those who have a kind of a diagnosis of autism or ADHD, will be given cards, and they'll have little pictures on them, and they'll have words. You'll have the blue zone, which is that I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling low, or I'm feeling sort of quiet, or and you'll have green, and you'll have yellow, and you'll have red, and they have lots of words on them, mostly to describe emotions. And I think, for me personally, they have become almost a kind of a stalwart, to the point where actually, I have had a child kind of say, oh, well, I'm in the yellow zone. And I've kind of had to go, so how are you feeling? And he sort of said, well, I'm in the yellow zone. And I kind of think, but actually, how are you feeling?
It's quite a sophisticated thing to recognise how you're actually feeling, particularly in that moment.
Absolutely. So it goes back to, right from the beginning, looking at giving the child the skills to say, okay, so we've just had a really fun game. Let's put our hands on our chest and let's see what we can feel. Oh, I can feel my heart's beating really fast. Well, can you feel that if you haven't got your hand on your chest? Can you feel, does your head feel different? Oh, it feels like kind of a bit swimmy, like I've worked really hard. So these are all feelings that you might associate with what kind of emotions. So actually starting to correlate a physical sensation with these emotive words actually allows them to start to read their own bodies, rather than rely on a grown-up's version of, well, you're in the yellow zone, so you must feel one of these designated words, because that's the yellow zone card words.
I mean, I suppose the problem is that even if these children are able to identify their emotional state at the right time, within a classroom environment, there's actually little that can be done, because the resources available to that teacher in that classroom are very limited.
Yeah.
Because not only are they going to have to deal with that child, but there's going to be other children in that room also suffering similar states. It's just unmanageable. These classrooms of kind of 35, soon to be 40 kids, it is just unmanageable, and particularly, when the classrooms, these Victorian classrooms generally, or even worse, the kind of 80s style classrooms, they've not changed in size.
No.
Nothing's changed about those. We're just shoehorning more kids into this kind of pressure pot. I mean, I just don't think that even as adults, if we are honest with ourselves, even with the best temperament in the world, as adults, none of us could sit in a room with 35, 40 kids for that amount of time. I mean, it's worse than prison, isn't it? I mean, I couldn't think of it's almost the definition of kind of, it's like the worst place you could be.
Well, I think that sounds like that's the next topic for the next
well,
conversation.
that's another rant for
Because
another day.
actually, I think that is a really important thing to kind of to discuss. And, you know, we'd love your comments and your feedback on that and lots of other topics. If there's anything you can think of that you would like us to discuss, then send us a message via all the usual channels. But for now, I think it's time for us to go. See you soon.